Join me in welcoming the moderator once again, Antony Currie, Associate Editor at Breaking Views, and the panelists Darrin Morgan, Director at Boeing, Dr. Matt Kennedy, Head of Strategy and Business International Energy Research Center, and Ahmed Neda, Vice President of Business Development at First Solar. Thank you.
So thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm Antony Currie. I'm Associate Editor at Reuters Breaking Views, which is the commentary unit or the financial commentary unit of Reuters. Basically, our job is to take an opinion on anything we see in the market that interests us. Normally it's on Wall Street. I cover Wall Street. It's on car companies, latest tech deals, whatever it is, any financial aspect to it at all, we'll take a view on it. And in general, we don't quote people, so anyone who wants to talk to me afterwards to give me a story, know that I will take your idea, turn it into a story, and then try and sell it back to you. And basically, theft is what we journalists are all about. Intellectual theft. It's a fantastic business model, which is why we're also struggling at the moment. Now, what brought me here is that in addition to my beats of Wall Street and car companies, I also have been trying to push us to do more on sustainable finance. We know that people are interested, we see it in the stats and the stories. So I wanted to make sure that I can come over here and help out and get some good panelists on. And what we've got here is some great guys talking about what corporates can do to help with climate change or against climate change. Now, every day it seems we've got yet another company saying something about sustainable development or about what they're doing in renewable energy. Microsoft, for example, has just decided to buy all the power from GE's latest wind plants in Ireland. Coca-Cola has done a very good job at returning all the water to river basins and watersheds that it takes out of its factories globally. And you can look around and see so many other examples, whether it's Apple, whether it's Mars that recently come up with another renewable energy and global sustainability standard. What we're going to do here, though, is actually dig into a few of the things that are happening. So we've got some good panelists here, and I'm going to start off, Darrin, with you, because something you said to me earlier as we were preparing struck me. Obviously, when we talk about all this, the company that was listed, in some respects, or in many respects, they're often saying, here's our new strategy for sustainable development. Here's our way of making sure that we are seen to be doing something for the environment. You said that what you cover, which is sustainable fuels, had really, at the start, nothing to do with that. It was a core element of what the company Boeing was looking at. So why don't you talk us through how you came to push this strategy?
Sure. I started about a decade ago. As you can imagine, in aviation, we have very long planning horizons. Multi-decadal is how we look at the market, our products and service for decades. So we think out decades. So when we started looking at the energy system that will feed our future need for fuels, our industry's need for fuels, we realized two things. One, we were going to need liquid fuels for a very long time. We'll probably be one of the last sectors that will be using liquid fuels. And therefore, we want to make sure that those fuels are meeting our strategic needs as an industry. And then the other trend at the time was aviation was being seen as a significant impact on climate. Now, the reality is we're only 2% of anthropogenic emissions, but when you ask the public what percentage of anthropogenic emissions we are, the number is often 10 times that high. Nonetheless, perception can be reality, and reality can be policy. And so we realized as an industry we needed to get both more active to change the perception, to help people understand what our real footprint is, but more importantly than that we needed to get very active in the fuel space because of the flip side of that 2%. We're a very small part of the barrel. We aren't a big consumer of petroleum in the grand scheme of things, and so a lot of the suppliers for our industry, for our fuels, are not that motivated to make a big difference to help us because we're just such a small sector. So we realized we needed to get very active as an industry, as a manufacturer specifically, working with our customers to develop these new fuels in supply chains and technologies in ways that hadn't been done before.
What was it that drove you to do that 10, 12 years ago? When you looked out those multi-decades, you saw what you saw, an end to oil, or you saw a dramatic shift down? What was it you made you think, okay, we've got to take the lead?
Cost curves, countervailing cost curves. So the future of oil generally is not what this region is blessed with, which is relatively affordable, relatively light sweet, which means jet-friendly crude. The future of oil is more along the petroleum, is more along the lines of what's happening in North America. It's heavy crudes, much more expensive to extract and produce. So the price is dipped at the moment, but price is not cost, right? And so the mega trend on cost is inexorably up on fossil fuels, liquid fossil fuels. That's a trend that we saw, we still believe in. Doesn't matter what the price is, it's a trend. That's not a trend we can do anything about. The algae died, or the dinosaurs died where it died, and then the petroleum is where it is. We're getting better at getting more of it, but nonetheless, it is a fixed thing, relatively speaking. The other cost trend that we saw and liked was the biogenic fuel side. So notwithstanding the bubble bursting on sort of early generations of biofuels that happened late last decade, we still see the innovation space around biotechnology as driving a favorable cost curve in the broader bioeconomy, which then will be a small part of, just like we are a small part of the petroleum complex today, we'll be a small part of the bioeconomy. But we realized by being quite innovative, clever, and early stage acting, we could drive the technologies more towards what we need. And we've been pretty successful with that approach.
So talk us through what you've achieved so far then. So you've done this for business reasons, but there's obviously been a payback in terms of carbon emissions. Talk us through what you've achieved.
Yeah, so we set our goal in 2008 of 1% of aviation fuel being addressable by renewables by 2015. So the bad news is we missed that mark, but the good news is next year we'll be at 3%. So and behind that number is there's a tranche of fuel that's already out there. It's hydrocarbon based, but it's going to ground transportation. We're doing a little bit of homework to annex that into being aviation fuel because it's technically superior, which is an important point to mention. That fuel approval for commercial purposes will be done, and that tranche of fuel, about 8 billion liters of fuel, will be then available to aviation, knock on wood, early next year, and that gets us to about 3%. So we missed 1% by 15, but we're at about 3% by 18. And the reason those numbers were picked, small numbers, we wanted to create the inflection point. So I come from the energy, the wind and solar, sort of thermal energy business, or renewable ground stationary energy industry, and having hailed from that industry and noticed that, as the earlier panel was talking about, once you get into a certain level of ubiquity with financing, you're off of project number 1 and you're on to project number 10, then it starts being much more of a financeable, repeatable thing. And so we knew that if we put our effort into the first couple percent, that's the hardest percent that needed help, then the commercial marketplace would be more successful. But to get from 0 to 1 is a lot harder than from getting from 1 to 10. So we knew that if we didn't help the industry or the stakeholders around that industry get from 0 to 1, we weren't going to get anywhere. So we're pretty much there now.
Yeah. And just to be clear, this has now become an industry-wide issue, right? That a lot of your competitors will be working on. I think not many, but so airlines and others will have come in on this as well, correct?
Yeah, it's an industry effort. We have the participation of most of the leading carriers in the world on the topic in various ways for the same reasons that I just mentioned. It's their future and our future. They're our customers, and they're going to need the fuel.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, an odd segue maybe, but just we mentioned this briefly earlier on. Planes and batteries. Will planes ever be powered by batteries? You said earlier on you're one of the last industries that probably have to rely on liquid fuel. So I know you guys are working on it, but what's the outlook for using batteries to fire a plane? Power a plane?
Sure. We have invested, our competitors have invested in battery technology and companies that are trying to create hybrid airplanes. So step number 1 is going to be most likely small hybrids, where essentially the takeoff power is electric, but then once you get in cruise, you switch to something liquid. That's most likely going to be the first baby step, and that's probably a decade to 2 decades away. The challenge for pure battery power for aviation is one of weight. It's not about getting the electrics or the engines or anything like that to work. That can happen relatively okay. It's purely about the weight of batteries. The best available technology on batteries cannot compete, even close to compete, with the chemical energy and liquid fuels. It's magnitudes of order off right now. And the challenge is there's not even anything on the drawing board or envisioned to be on the drawing board that can get us to where we can even see how to get there from here. And so for the time being, it's the idea of a purely electric long-haul airplane, the kinds of airplane that can get you from here to Europe or here to the United States or here to China. That is going to take multiple decades. And so the first step that we and other peer OEMs have embarked on is a baby step, which is smaller airplanes, very short haul. Think small regional freight airplanes that can go a couple hundred miles and have a small payload and hybrid.
Right.
So both some battery and liquids. In either case, liquid fuels are going to be part of the future for multiple decades for us.
Yeah, and let's switch to solar energy. Ahmed is putting you on this as your first solar here in the region. You are on the ground seeing a lot of development. Talk us through where you see the state of play at the moment from your seat.
Thank you. I think let's start first by the key vision of the region and the industry. The sustainability of the solar is now the focus, because I think the economics have proven to be at par, and we have seen already significant changes that were unheard of in the last 24 months or 36 months, including the Middle East, where the cost of solar is no longer a question. People used in the past to perceive it as an expensive solution, return on investment takes long, and all of this myth has changed completely. So I think the industry as an overall is now focusing on further efficiency to improve the levelized cost of electricity. So that's on the price and cost structure. But at the same time, prudent and long-term view, responsible manufacturers are also trying to ensure that sustainability of this product remains a valid case at all times. So we have the economics and we have the technology supporting it. So if you look at initiatives in First Solar, for example, we were very focused on our industrial process, to ensure that we produce the panels in a friendly, economic way for our clients, obviously, but also eco-friendly situation. So we worked very hard on R&D, spent millions of dollars over time to ensure that this manufacturing process has the least carbon footprint and uses the least amount of industrial water. And we succeeded in that. So today we see it visible. We are proud of it, obviously, and we continue to drive the metrics harder and harder. And what was interesting also is to see the other side of the formula, which is the end users. All of a sudden, France, for example, in their last national procurement process, favored technologies on the solar panels which has less footprint on manufacturing process. Many of our competitors didn't like that, obviously, because they thought that this was not part of the game, but no. End users are starting to see the value of a sustainable product, not just because it's delivering economic value, but the way it's being produced is also driving a sustainable economy and a sustainable ecosystem around it. And obviously we did that in partnerships with our supply chain to start with. We keep driving them very hard. It's like quality control in our process. Also the sustainability of what they use and how they present the material when they supply us certain components on our manufacturing process. Plus, of course, the inherent technology and our IP on how we produce our panels, which has proven to be, so far, as I said, it's independently verified, by the way, this data. It's not like a marketing pitch here. And that First Solar manufacturing process uses the least carbon footprint and the least industrial water during the manufacturing of the panel.
So I mean, it would strike me that any company trying to sell solar panels and solar energy would want to take that route. But of course, as you were saying, we are now got to the point where it's cost effective. But beforehand, were you investing money in your supply chain and in keeping those environmental costs low before that turn had happened on pricing?
I think it was. Oh yes, of course, because this is not something you can deliver in 1 or 2 years. These are years of money being spent on the process to improve it, and obviously, as you do that, you get cost benefits anyway. So as long as you have that mission critical and focus objective in your mind, there are also very friendly outcomes to the process, and one of them obviously was the cost of the panel continues to be lower. So we benefited directly from a company perspective and a cost perspective, but also we make sure that our supply chain has that focus. So it's a combination of knowledge and research over years and years. Just to give you another data point, the entire solar industry, manufacturing of panels around the world spends around $250 to $260 million on R&D every year. Okay, that's about the average. First Solar spends $120 million of that every year. Okay, so there must be an outcome after all of that, and that we're seeing it right now.
And when you talk about the suppliers and getting them on board, how difficult was that initially? Because I think a lot of corporates, it's very easy for corporates to take care of their own house, as it were, and say, look, we can do this, we've achieved this amount of reduction in water, energy, whatever. Going out to suppliers sometimes can be difficult, I would think. You might be able to chosen suppliers which can only do it in a certain way. I mean, how easy or difficult was it to change their mentality?
I think obviously there were difficulties, and there were definitely suppliers who dropped off the pipeline as we built it, But overall, I think the commitment that we have seen for the industry in general, and R&D worldwide, not just in the US, continues to drive supplier to attend to this. And the more you bring it to focus, and I think that the French procurement process was a very solid example of that. Today, SNCF, which is the railway operator of France, is demanding, to see the generation not just as a green generation, but they want to understand what comes behind that. So the suppliers realize that it's not only First Solar who's keeping the gate here. Someone else also starting to put their own valves and will control it. If you do not supply what is green, friendly, or sustainable, we will stop your buyer, which is First Solar, from buying from you. That's really the message in the next 5 years.
Yeah.
So it's a very serious, action, very serious program, and I do believe that also our competitors from other platforms of, solar manufacturing on the crystalline silicon side are probably going to start to look into that as well, because the process of crystalline silicon compared to our process is very different, and maybe we have some advantage in that process. But I think the assembly line kind of concept of the wafers to the end product is going to see the same kind of rigor, provided the end users and countries put that measure as an important part of the evaluation of who takes the job.
Right. Matt, let's bring in you from your seat at the International Energy Research Centre. I mean, how do you see various companies adapting to this, or maybe utilities is the best place to start? Tell us where you see that the biggest changes happening, and what the biggest challenge might be. So,
from a utility perspective?
Start with utilities.
Well, utilities are under big pressure. So if I give you an example of the electricity sector and Europe, electricity markets haven't changed in 100 years. So they're only going to get less market share. So what is happening is that SMEs or disruptors are developing new products, new services, new technologies that can actually take customers from utilities with new offerings. So the utility can either maintain their business as usual and hope that they can weather the storm, or they can adapt. And what I'm finding is a lot of the utilities are adapting. So a utility that necessarily was on the supply side may now have business in PV. They might be developing joint ventures with companies to develop wind farms, purchasing battery storage technology companies. They're becoming much more diversified in terms of what their portfolio is. And because in effect they are trying to react to a market that is engaging in rapid transformation.
Yeah, Darrin.
Yeah. In my part of the world, the Pacific Northwest of the U.S., we have a massive, relatively, shift towards electrified vehicles. I used to work for the power provider in our region, so I know a little bit about this stuff. I'm curious, but I've been out of touch for a while. I'm curious how the shift towards ground transportation, electrification, I see my former employer in our region being very embracing of that, because it does provide them a way to play in the new energy economy, the new electric economy. Is that just my region, or are utilities seeing a shift towards electrification as a very positive sign? Yes, please bring me more.
Well, utilities are trying to get new revenue opportunities. So in terms of an electric utility, they're promoting the electrification of heat, and they're promoting the electrification of transport. In a European economy, which has a vibrant amount of wind on the system, they are bringing in electric vehicles with different time of use tariffs so that they can maximize wind that's penetrated at night, so they can deploy it to electric vehicles. But the biggest challenge that EVs has is that at a local substation level, where the distribution operator isn't sure what their cable is or their network is like, if everyone starts putting battery storage into their homes, plugging in EVs, you could have blackouts in terms of your local substation. So your main transmission operator doesn't necessarily care about that, but your distribution operator really is worried about having new devices plugging into their network, especially at a residential and commercial sector.
Does it matter? So in my world, in my little part of the world, it's mostly hydroelectric, and so the renewable portion is fairly stable baseload kind of power. Is that, but where the renewable power is highly variable, like wind or solar, does that change the equation for these guys?
It just means in effect, it's energy arbitrage. You're generally moving your wind from at night, and it depends on your jurisdiction. If you think of Northern Europe, Scandinavia, say, that have an abundance of hydro, that it's very easy. All their renewable generation is effectively exported. In a country like Ireland, which is 90% import dependent on fossil, the EU average is around 55%. Any move towards more wind or more PV, which is moving towards, which seems a bit funny comparing it to UAE, but has benefits for the economy wide, simply because you're reducing the cost of import dependence and you're reducing the cost of storage of fossil.
I have a comment on this as well, if you allow me, because for the Middle East, the equation of energy has a very interesting component, which is the subsidies. All the Middle Eastern countries have enjoyed many years of subsidized energy generation because of whatever reasons, either social or because of the oil availability. Now, if you look at the renewables equation today with its current economics and sustainable attraction to finance at very attractive rates, lower risks, all of a sudden that creates an opportunity for the Middle Eastern utilities to add more capacity of solar, particularly because it's more predictable, I think, than wind in the Middle East. And by doing that, you are effectively enabling the government's programs of removing subsidies slowly from the system, which has been a chronic problem for most of the governments. With the tariffs that we have seen in the Middle East over the last 36 months, and the last one in Saudi particularly, again, all of a sudden even Saudi Arabia is starting to see, why are we even generating from burning our own oil, instead of exporting it or doing something more at the, downstream, rather than just burning it into gas turbines. So that's economic impact on subsidies is going to be a very serious positive impact, in my opinion, for the most of the Middle Eastern countries over the next 5 to 10 years. And I believe also corporates who are in the Middle East will start to look into that as as a way positive to reduce, their cost, because they have been also using this electricity that comes at a very cheap subsidized price. And if all of a sudden, the governments are going to have programs to remove subsidies, it means that the cost of electricity that goes into the direct production will start to change, and they need to manage that. So one of the things that are being considered in certain countries like Jordan, for example, or Egypt, very seriously now is the legislations of the electricity law that allows wheeling, where private generations can sell to private producers, which was not the case in the Middle East before. So I see a complete shift on how the utilities and corporates will better use energy or renewable energy for a sustainable growth, and at the same time right on the economics, which they thought would never happen 5 years ago.
It does get us a bit into the realm of politics, which we'll try and stay off as much as possible, but how easy is it for countries in the Middle East to manage that at the moment? I'm going to come up with a completely different example, which Matt, you probably know about, which was Ireland and water, where the Irish decided they would start charging or increasing the cost for water, I forget which, and I think it was done as part of EU law, but of course also pricing water properly is important. But there was such a revolt against this in Ireland, I think the government reversed course on charging for water, and that's Ireland. That's just water.
This is your way of avoiding politics, is it?
I try my best.
Well, yes. So Ireland was one of the only countries in Europe, if not the only country in Europe, that didn't charge consumers for their water use. So it didn't meter its water. So over a period of time, it deployed a strategy of water metering. Now, in effect, it was a failed strategy. So if you go back from an environmental policy perspective, Ireland has been one of the leaders, I guess, in terms of ruling out smoking within public areas, especially indoors, ruling out bringing in a recycling tax in terms of charging for plastic. But actually, it was just the failure wasn't around a revolt against charges for water. The failure was an inept strategy that was deployed. And actually, the term meter was used in a very negative sense. This is something that is replacing a right that you have to available water. So it became, firstly, the timing of the strategy was failed because it came at a time when we were still going through the IMF. So people were being taxed quite heavily. And this was seen as being a right that was effectively taken away. But I think the vast majority of people in Ireland are very happy to pay for water. It's just a failed political strategy to deploy it.
So, I mean, how does that then figure into what happens over here? And I think what you're saying is right. Longer term, if that's 3 to 5 years, you can see the shift. But there's surely going to be an interregnum where it's going to be you're going to be paying more, and you've got to wait for the benefits to come in a few years' time.
Well, it all depends on how, again, the subsidy program works and the rate at which we are taking it out from the system. But at the same time, remember that also the cost of generation from renewables, has, in my opinion, even bypassed the rate, of removal of subsidy, which means the end user will be maybe better off rather than the other way around.
But eventually, I suppose.
Sorry?
Not straight up. Like I say, it depends on how the subsidy.
Exactly. It depends on the rate at which you are removing the subsidies and the rate at which the cost of energy from renewables is being reduced. And also what is the price spot that the utilities would want to charge to their clients, and whether they want to make money out of it or significant money out of it or just little money out of it. But overall the economics are there. I give you another very solid economic point. If you look at Aramco in Saudi Arabia currently, with its current refining capacity, is a net importer of diesel, surprisingly enough. Okay, so the diesel is being imported on the market price, being supplied to the local market, and there are approximately at least 2 gigawatt of diesel generation, either off grid or privately in certain captive situations in the country. So again, for whatever reasons, the Saudi government has maintained subsidies on diesel for a long time. Now, if you can deploy 2 gigawatt of solar hybrid solutions, you can displace immediately during the day all this diesel, which has a direct impact on Aramco, which is believing to now moving to becoming a properly managed 5% IPO that everyone will demand to know what is their cost of production and lots of other things that being discussed these days in the market. So forget about, as you said, the politics. There's a direct impact on the country economy, okay, that these subsidies can be used for something different rather than subsidizing diesel for whatever reasons. So I think all the mix of renewables in coming with utilities, we started maybe the question with how utilities are behaving around the renewables to promote sustainability. Everyone is making a benefit out of this.
Right.
Whether you say directly or in a space of time or indirectly, it is coming. Because the economics of solar has changed completely to the right direction.
Right.
Just to comment on the subsidy question, I don't think subsidies are going away for renewables. It's really linked to risk, market risk, and finance. So if you're going into a financial institution in Europe and you can show to your banker that you have a feed-in tariff for 15 years for your wind plant or your solar plant, you will get the project capital. If you don't have a feed-in tariff, it's at a problem basis because you can't show the certainty of your finance. And I think the subsidies are unlocking that. Now the question is who pays for the subsidies? Subsidies are undoubtedly paid for by the taxpayer through a public service obligation in one form or another. But to back up your point, it's about offsetting what a consumer is paying in terms of a fossil versus what a consumer is paying in terms of a green electricity or renewable heat. And I think that a consumer is much more happy and willing to pay for that subsidy than pay for the cost of storage of a fossil fuel. So undoubtedly this is about risk in terms of finance, that's why a subsidy is there, but also it's there because it's very expensive to start up. The cost of capital is very expensive to start up a new wind or new solar plant. And it's not correct to compare it against an existing fossil or nuclear plant that has been in operation for 15 years that is actually, after a period of time, is just making profit. So you have immense barriers there when you compare the new generation of renewables versus existing generation of fossil.
Is the return on capital or investment going to be better once it's created, especially in certain areas, like I suppose in the Middle East with solar? Surely that's got to be a better longer term investment than having a fossil fuel platform that needs constantly to get fossil fuel out of the ground.
I think I would agree with you until the last 2 years when we saw, of course, the financial institutions and particularly the local or Middle Eastern financial institutions. When we started 4 years ago, there wasn't a single bank in the Middle East financing any renewable project, particularly solar. Okay? If you go now, and we're not talking 10 years, we're talking 4 years only. The last 24 months, the largest projects in the world, whether it's Dubai or Abu Dhabi on the solar energy, are syndicated loans from local banks. And their average cost of lending to the developers is extremely competitive. It may not be as competitive as you try to get a loan or a support for a project from EDF in France, of course. Yes, not there yet, but a big shift. We were talking all-in cost of 7% less than 3 years ago. We are now hearing 4.2% and 4.5%. That's a significant shift in such a short span of time. And I think it's related to the viability of the projects. Of course, the credibility of the off-takers remains a very critical part. Of course, today we have sovereign guarantees for most of the utilities in the Middle East, something that could also change in the future, okay, as we see more liberalization of the electricity generation market and the transmission and distribution. So, again, the 5 years in the near horizon are extremely interesting for the industry, and accordingly, I believe that this will drive more and more ideas around what else can we bring to the table to continue to drive sustainability in the Middle East region.
Great, well, thanks so much. Unfortunately, we do have to stop right now. Please do, I know there are a couple others with questions, please do come up and ask the panelists at the end. We do have to close the session. So please join me in thanking Darrin, Matt, and Ahmed, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.